The moment I arrived at my new home, the president of the HOA stormed onto my property, demanding that I hand over my waterfront land. She claimed it belonged to the neighborhood due to some so-called agreement with the last owner. According to her, I had no legal claim to it, and she made it clear that if I didn't comply, she'd make my life miserable. What she didn't realize was that this wasn't just some regular cabin. Things were about to go in a direction she hadn't prepared for, and I wasn't the type to walk away from a challenge. So tell me, what would you do in my place? Drop your thoughts in the comments. After nearly 2 decades of grinding away 18-hour workdays, building my tech startup from nothing, pushing through multiple rounds of venture funding, and countless nights sleeping on the office couch, I finally reached a dream I'd worked my entire life for, a peaceful lakeside cabin. That first morning, I sat on the deck, hands wrapped around a hot cup of coffee, letting the quiet sink in. The silence was almost jarring, like I was hearing my own heartbeat for the first time in years. After decades immersed in the chaos of city life, the serenity of the lake felt surreal. It promised peace, but even then, I could sense it wouldn't last forever. The realtor had called it a hidden gem, and as I watched the morning sun spill gold across the water, I understood exactly why. It was calm, blissfully so. No honking horns, no buzzing phones, no back-to-back meetings. Just me, the lake, and the property I had finally earned after years of scraping by in cramped apartments and paying off mortgages. I actually thought I might sleep through the night without being jolted awake by server outages or last-minute deadlines. I was maybe 30 minutes into this hard-earned peace when the crunch of heels on gravel shattered the silence. I looked up to see a woman marching toward me, completely out of place in her crisp business suit, walking like she owned the land beneath her. Her stride was sharp, every step reeking of authority. She hadn't turned. She didn't even blink as the wind tugged at her hair. Her eyes were cold, scanning my property like she was already mentally rearranging it. She had the kind of presence that screamed, "I'm here to make your life difficult." And honestly, I should have just locked the door right then. Her outfit was meticulously curated, a suburban warrior's uniform complete with a clipboard and a handful of documents that looked official enough to pass for something legal. She didn't bother with greetings or introductions. She simply started inspecting my land like she had every right to be there. Her eyes moved from my dock to the shoreline to the cabin itself, like she was running a silent audit of everything I owned. When she finally spoke, her tone left no room for conversation. "I'm Laura Kent, president of the Homeowners Association for Willow Lake," she announced, her tight smile implying she thought she was doing me a favor. We maintained the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. As she surveyed my cabin, her expression suggested I was already falling short. "You must be new," she added, her voice laced with condescension. "We have certain standards we like to maintain." The way she said standards made it sound like I was already in violation of some unspoken law. Then she pulled out a crudely drawn map that looked more like a child's art project than a legal document, wavy lines, smudged markers, and all. She pointed right at my waterfront like she was presenting a courtroom exhibit. "This section here has always been considered community property," she said, tapping it with her finger like she was staking a claim. "The previous owner understood that. There's been a long-standing arrangement." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She really just walked onto my land and tried to convince me that I didn't actually own part of it. But I stayed calm and asked her to show me whatever paperwork backed this so-called agreement. Instead, I brought out my own documents, an official property deed and a professionally surveyed map, complete with stamped red seals. I laid them out on the table like cards in a winning poker hand and pointed to the boundary lines that made it very clear the land was legally mine all the way down to the waterline. "These are legal documents," I told her, keeping my tone even. "They confirm I own everything up to the shore." But she didn't even bother looking at them properly. She just waved them off like they were nothing. She kept repeating that there had been some verbal understanding with a man named Walker, the previous owner. But when she mentioned his name, something shifted. Her voice got tight. Her gaze flicked away. She said, "Walker understood how we do things around here," but it sounded more like she was trying to reassure herself than me. There was something off about the way she clung to his name as if invoking it would make my legal documents disappear. "Walker left me with certain understandings about the community's needs," she said. The way she spoke sent a chill down my spine. It sounded desperate, like she was holding on to a promise that maybe wasn't as concrete as she pretended. I started to wonder what Walker had really said to her and why she seemed so uneasy talking about promises made by someone who was no longer around to confirm them. Before I could push further, though, she quickly snapped back into her authoritative tone like flipping a switch. "The HOA board will handle this matter appropriately," she declared, her voice full of fake confidence that didn't convince anyone. "You'll come to understand the rules soon enough, Mr. Reed." The way she said my name, it felt like a threat. And as she walked back to her car, she kept glancing over her shoulder like she expected someone, or something, to stop her. A broken bar emerged from the shadows. For a second, I found myself mirroring her glancing over my shoulder, half expecting something to jump out from the tree line. Her eyes caught mine again, and this time, her voice dropped. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp like a knife hidden inside a velvet pouch. "I think we need to talk about your property. I trust you'll be cooperative." It wasn't a request, it was a statement wrapped in civility, polished like a threat that had been rehearsed 100 times. As her car crunched back down the driveway, something inside me twisted, not fear exactly, but an alertness, the kind that tells you the game just changed, and you've been placed on the board without consent. I stood there long after the dust had settled, wondering if I'd just had a conversation with a neighbor or been served a warning by something much colder. I sat back down, but the coffee was cold now. The piece I'd felt earlier that morning had been pierced, shattered like thin glass. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment the quiet war began. The next day, I came back from a quick grocery run to find a stack of papers jammed into my mailbox. Not mail, not flyers, notice as official, threatening, and absurd. One of them claimed my red doormat. Yes, the one I chose specifically because it reminded me of rust-colored leaves and quiet October. So was non-compliant with HOA Regulation 12.4, a $50 fine, due in 10 days. Apparently, the color red was now an architectural crime. It would have been laughable, if it hadn't been so calculated. The next morning, a notice for my grass exceeds approved height by 0.5 inches, a $75 fine. The ink on the paper wasn't even dry before another followed. Noise violation, wind chimes, the ones that barely whispered even when the wind was strong, another $100. The language in each letter grew more formal, more punitive, like someone wanted me to forget this was still supposed to be home. At first, I assumed it was just bureaucracy gone wild, maybe a few overzealous board members with nothing better to do. But then I looked closer. The timing, the tone, the specificity. This wasn't random. It was strategic. Death by 1,000 regulations. Every infraction, no matter how small, was a way to chip away at my patience, my pocket, and my presence here. But Laura had miscalculated one thing. I'd built an entire company on systems, on catching patterns in noise. I didn't fight back with Raggy. I built a spreadsheet, photographs, timestamps, GPS-tagged images, a paper trail so clean, it looked like I was prepping for a court case. She wanted a paper war? Fine, I'd give her one. By week's end, I shifted tactics. I started walking the neighborhood quietly, like a tourist with a camera. I wasn't sightseeing, I was investigating. Rule violations were everywhere, and the crown jewel, Laura Kent's own property, her house, was a compliance disaster. An illegally modified fence, a giant political sign 5 times the allowed dimensions, her golden retriever running off-leash every morning at 6 a.m. I didn't need to embellish anything, I just documented it all objectively, thoroughly, professionally. And that's when I met Tim. He was kneeling in his garden, hands in the soil like he was trying to anchor himself to something. His eyes flicked up the moment he noticed me, and he gave a nervous smiley like a man who'd learned too well how to avoid drawing attention. "Oliver, right?" he said, softly, glancing around as if our conversation might be recorded. "You seem like a reasonable guy. Thought I should warn you." "Your place?" "It used to belong to Charles Walker." I nodded. The name had come up before, but never like this. Tim's voice lowered even more. "He and Laura, they had history." He didn't like her. She didn't like him. But more than that, he knew something. Something that scared her. There was a pause. He didn't elaborate, just pulled a few weeds in silence. I could tell it cost him something to even bring it up. "You think all this is about it, Doc?" he muttered. "That cabin. It's part of something Laura didn't control. And she can't stand that." I waited, but that was all he'd say for now. But I walked away that evening feeling like a lock had just clicked open somewhere in the back of my mind. Laura wasn't just enforcing rules, she was guarding something, and I had just stepped into her territory. "Help me understand what I'm up against," I said quietly. Tim's expression tightened, and his voice dipped even lower. "Walker was a good man," he said, glancing sideways toward the trees like they might be listening, "but Laura made his life hell near the end. Constant pressure, petty complaints, always looking for ways to corner him. She wanted that your land even back then." He paused, as if choosing his next words with caution. "Before he passed, he used to say one thing over and over: she'll regret it. Said he was working on something. Called it his A masterpiece." Tim shook his head faintly, eyes drifting toward my cabin. "Said he left her a surprise." The way he said it didn't sound vindictive. It sounded like someone trying to teach a lesson, one she'd refused to learn. A chill crept in, not from the wind, but from something heavier. A realization. Whatever Walker built, or whatever message he intended, some part of it now belonged to me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I started researching Walker, trying to separate the man from the myth. What I found surprised me. Newspaper clippings, old blog posts, archived interviews. He had a reputation for designing spaces that told stories, exposed secrets. One article described a city hall he helped renovate, where the main fountain would malfunction and soak corrupt officials whenever they held press conferences. A subtle but deliberate engineering meant to embarrass the dishonest. This wasn't just design, it was performance. Justice through architecture. Another article, his obituary, actually mentioned how he'd spent his final years working on something deeply personal, his legacy, his masterwork. Suddenly, Tim's warning wasn't just a neighborhood rumor, it was context. The very next morning, a certified letter arrived, a hand-delivered, heavy envelope, legal formatting, my name typed in block letters like a summons. I opened it slowly. A disciplinary hearing, mandatory appearance. Laura's signature stretched confidently across the bottom like she was signing off on a victory. But then I noticed something strange. The letterhead had been altered. Walker's old mailing address was still faintly visible beneath Laura's handwriting, crossed out, but not quite erased. She hadn't just replaced him physically, she was rebranding his space as hers, rewriting the past to consolidate her hold on the present. Then there was the symbol, barely visible, a small geometric shape printed faintly into the paper's corner. It stirred something in my memory, but I couldn't quite place it, yet I knew it was deliberate, a mark, a clue. And in that moment, a new idea settled in. Walker hadn't just sold me a cabin, he'd enlisted me into something, a plan, maybe even a trap for her. That afternoon, I went back through the HOA documents. Everything seemed polished, official, but when I read closely, nothing added up. Rules contradicted other rules, citations referenced outdated bylaws. It felt like trying to walk straight in a hall of mirrors. Every turn reflected something different, and every page seemed designed to confuse. The hearing took place in Laura's dining room. Her table had been transformed into a mock courtroom. She sat at the head like a self-appointed judge. 3 board members flanked her, clearly allies, their postures tense but obedient. They weren't here to mediate. They were here to back her up. But I didn't walk in like a man unsure of his footing. I walked in with a briefcase, tabbed folders, evidence, timestamps. It wasn't a show of force, it was clarity. And clarity, in a room like that, is power. I'll be recording this meeting under HOA rules, Section 4.7, I said, setting the digital recorder on the table. The silence that followed was sharp. Laura blinked. "That's a HOA. That's not allowed with HOA." "It is," I interrupted, calm. "I've highlighted the section for your convenience." The room shifted. The board members straightened slightly. One leaned forward, suddenly aware that the meeting had left the casual realm of HOA politics and entered a documented, accountable space. Laura's posture remained confident, but her eyes flickered just for a moment. I walked them through my documentation, The property deed, the original survey, the title insurance, every piece aligned, every claim traceable. The board barely acknowledged it. They were expecting a disorganized homeowner, not someone who came armed with legal precision. Then came the photos, Laura's violations, her oversized political signs, fence modifications, her off-leash dog roaming daily, every image stamped with time, date, location. At first, the board members sat still, but then something changed. One of them picked up a photo and just stared at it, like he was seeing her Ozzy and her leadership for the first time. No one said a word, but I could feel it. The authority in the room had shifted, and Laura knew it. Despite the overwhelming evidence I laid out, the board voted against me, not with debate, not even with hesitation, just a silent show of hands, as if Laura had spoken for them already with a single, knowing glance. Then she delivered her verdict: $1,500 fine, $100 per day until I complied. The number was less shocking than the tone she used, like she just declared checkmate. But this wasn't about money. It never had been. She'd just taken things to another level. This wasn't neighborly bickering. This was an attempt to weaponize the system against me. Mr. Reed has 30 days to pay, Laura announced, or we'll place a lien on his property. There was a pause. No one spoke. Even the air in the room felt still. A lien over a doormat dispute. That's when it became unmistakably clear. This wasn't enforcement. This was an attempt to take my home. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. Laura, broken bar, maybe we should reconsider. That seems extreme. He didn't sound rebellious, just unsettled, like someone realizing, a bit too late, that they'd been pulled into something ugly. But Laura shut him down without looking up. The decision is final. Her voice carried that brittle kind of authority that cracks the moment someone pushes back. I noticed the shift is small, but real. Two of the board members exchanged glances. One started taking notes, not for the record, for protection. And that's when something inside me clicked. This wasn't a power struggle anymore. This was attempted theft dressed in policy. I stood up slowly, deliberately, locking eyes with each of them. This recording, I said calmly, will be very helpful in the lawsuit that's coming. Not a threat, a statement of fact. For the first time, Laura looked afraid, not dramatically, just a flicker in her eyes, but it was enough to tell me. She was used to people folding, not fighting back. Just as I was gathering my documents, my phone buzzed. A neighbor, a quiet voice on the other end. She's been walking the neighborhood, they said. Marking lots. Yours was on her list. I didn't wait to process it. I needed help, real help. Clara Stone came, recommended by someone who'd been through this before. The moment I stepped into her office, I knew I was in the right place. No frills, just framed victories on the wall, real ones. Clients who hadn't just survived harassment, but fought back and won. Clara was sharp, precise, the kind of lawyer who didn't waste words. She scanned my documents, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up. This isn't about the hoe, she said. It's about money. There's a pattern here, and people only repeat patterns when there's something valuable at the end of them. We dug in, hard. What we found was bigger than I'd expected. Days at the county office, poring over permit applications, layer after layer of bureaucracy. Most people would have given up, but persistence has its own kind of power, and eventually, we found it. Kent Brothers Construction, LLC, permit after permit, all rejected for one reason: no proper vehicle access to the proposed resort site. And then we saw the site map. Their access road ran directly through my property. Suddenly, it all made sense. Laura didn't want to fine me. She didn't care about rules. She wanted me gone. And the motive wasn't civic duty. It was profit. Her brother's construction firm had been planning a boutique lakeside resort of cabins, marina, even a restaurant. The plans were polished, the kind you pitch to investors over wine and steak. But none of it would work without one thing: my land, my cabin, my waterfront access. And Laura? She'd used her power to clear the path, quietly, systematically, wrapping greed in policy, hiding ambition behind community guidelines. This wasn't enforcement, it was a quiet kind of warfare against me. She didn't just want to build a resort, she wanted to erase me to do it. At this point, I shouldn't have been shocked, but the sheer precision of Anna Drummond's scheme took my breath away. She had looked me straight in the eye, spun lies about community property, while scheming behind the scenes to snatch my land for her family's personal gain. She wasn't using her authority as a tool, she was wielding it as a weapon, and the way she'd done it, it was almost impressively corrupt, like she'd studied every dirty trick in the book and decided to deploy them all at once. That's when Clara made a breakthrough. While combing through environmental protection records, she stumbled upon something crucial, and everything suddenly changed. "Oliver," she said, eyes narrowing as she read through the document, "there's a conservation easement filed 8 years ago on your waterfront. No development allowed, at all, ever. If anyone even tried to construct an access road through my property, it would trigger massive federal violations, with fines up to $10,000 per day. This easement is bulletproof," Clara said, her voice tinged with awe, like she'd just discovered buried treasure. But why would Walker restrict his own land like this? What was he trying to protect? Then the answer hit us. And it was brilliant. Charles Walker hadn't been Macron v. He knew someone eventually would try to exploit that land. So, he didn't just block them, he baited them. He crafted an invisible tripwire that would activate the moment someone like Anna Drummond came sniffing around with dollar signs in their eyes. We dug into Walker's past, and the man's history read like a vigilante legend. Old newspaper articles told stories of elaborate setups and poetic justice. One client tried to cut corners on drainage in a commercial project. Walker designed the lot to flood unless proper systems were installed. He forced them to fix it their way, but his projects were always legal mazes, with hidden clauses, surprise restrictions, and cleverly placed traps. This wasn't just architecture, it was warfare. Strategic, psychological, moral. The conservation easement was no coincidence. It was the final play in a long game Walker had started years ago, and Anna was walking right into it with her eyes shut. "Let her move first," Clara advised. "She won't even realize what she's triggering. When she crosses the line, it'll all come crashing down automatically." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was holding the winning hand, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that I was still in someone else's game, playing by rules I didn't fully understand. Then I saw it. A date on the easement documents had been altered, tracked, watched. Anna wasn't just playing by the rules, she was writing them. And I had to decide, should I let her destroy herself a broken bar or help speed things along? Turns out, Walker had already made that choice for me. My home security cameras caught Anna Drummond on my property while I was out grabbing groceries, meeting with contractors, casually marking where the access road should go. Watching the footage was surreal, like a criminal narrating her own arrest in slow motion. She pointed confidently, giving directions like she owned the place. "Just get it started," she said. "We'll sort out the legal crap later." Exactly the kind of gift Clara had told me to hope for. There she was, caught on camera, committing a federal environmental violation, with full belief that her HOA authority outranked conservation law. Her arrogance was unbelievably broken bar and entirely predictable. When I returned, I saw it for myself. Contractors hammering fence posts into my protected land while Anna barked at them to move faster, clearly frustrated with their hesitation. It was like watching someone walk straight into a bear trap and complain that the trap wasn't soft enough. The workers looked uneasy. One finally said, "Ma'am, we need to see permits before we keep going, especially on lakefront land." She snapped back, "I am the HOA president. I've got the paperwork." She didn't, and they knew it. That was my cue. I followed Clara's plan like a military op. One phone call and the dominoes fell. Clara contacted the building inspector. I notified the sheriff's office. The county surveyor was looped in. Within an hour, my property was crawling with officials like a bureaucratic SWAT team, clipboards, body cams, measuring tapes, and all. Neighbors gathered like it was a live-action courtroom drama. Tim appeared behind the crowd, nodded at me, and said quietly, "Told you Walker left surprises." Anna's expression was priceless. Panic, confusion, terror. She had no idea what she'd walked into. Clara arrived last, looking like a prosecutor stepping into her closing argument. "Mrs. Kent," she said firmly, loud enough for everyone to hear, You're destroying federally protected land. That's a violation of the U.S. Conservation Act." The building inspector confirmed the damage. The county surveyor traced the property lines with military-grade GPS. The sheriff's deputy took photos, recorded notes, and began logging the incident as a crime scene. Anna's confident mask finally cracked. For the first time since we crossed paths, she looked genuinely terrified. And it was only the beginning. This wasn't some suburban HOA dispute anymore. This was federal law enforcement territory, and Anna was completely out of her depth. I laid down my documents, each piece of evidence as solid as the ground beneath my feet. But when the Andromeda board glanced at them, it was as if I didn't even exist. Their dismissive looks confirmed what I already feared. This wasn't about rules. It was about power. My fight wasn't just legal anymore. It was against something far darker. Federal environmental violations carry automatic fines of up to $10,000 per day. The contractors dropped their tools the moment they heard that number, like they just realized they were standing on a live wire. They refused to continue without permits they now knew didn't exist, backing away from the fence posts like they were radioactive. Anna tried to keep up appearances, but her voice shook as her confident illegal plan unraveled in front of half the neighborhood. "I'm the Andromeda president," she kept shouting, like it was some magic spell that could erase federal law. The sheriff issued her a trespass citation. The building inspector ordered an immediate halt to all work, and the surveyor confirmed the fence posts were illegally placed on protected land. The contractors demanded immediate payment for their wasted time and flat out refused to remove the fence posts unless paid extra, leaving Anna to pay double for her failed scheme. As I calmly presented my evidence, I could see Anna's eyes flicker nervously. Though her plastic smile stayed fixed, she was still trying to play the intimidation game. The Andromeda boardroom was her stage, and she knew how to control the performance. But this time, I wasn't playing by her script. Public humiliation was the final ingredient in Walker's recipe for justice, and it was more satisfying than I imagined. A crowd of neighbors, people Anna had ruled through fear, stood watching as her empire collapsed in real time. It was like watching the curtain get pulled back on The Wizard of Oz. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly neighbor, fined $200 by Anna for painting her mailbox the wrong shade of yellow, whispered to those around her. First time someone stood up to her and won. Anna had to pay the same contractors again to tear down the fence she illegally ordered. As she walked away from the disaster she caused, she turned back to me, rage and desperation twisting her face. "You have no idea what you're interfering with, Reed," she hissed. But I did, and it was beautiful. The board vote was unanimous. She lost. As the final words echoed through the room, a chill ran through me, because even in defeat, Anna wasn't done. I saw it in her eyes. This was just the beginning of something worse. Clara and I spent the night drafting a weaponized truth bomb. It exposed Anna's entire illegal land grab scheme, with photos, conservation documents, and a timeline of her harassment that read like a criminal indictment. We bundled everything into evidence packets and sent them to every home in the Andromeda community. I felt like a revolutionary distributing forbidden leaflets. But sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. Anna had ruled with intimidation for years. It was time to turn on the lights and show people exactly who they'd empowered and how far she was willing to go to enrich herself. As I dug deeper, I uncovered connections between Anna and a powerful group within the community who also stood to profit from my land. This wasn't just her doing, it was a network, a web of quiet corruption, and every thread led back to something bigger than I'd imagined. The reaction was explosive. Within hours of the letter being delivered, my phone lit up like a war room. Neighbors called in outrage, finally breaking their silence and sharing stories of their own Anna horror shows. Mrs. Patterson, a cheerful mailbox victim, was just the tip of the iceberg. Mr. Rodriguez had been forced to tear down his kid's backyard playset because Anna deemed it architecturally inconsistent, even though no one could see it. The pattern was clear now. Abuse of power disguised as rule enforcement. Stories poured in. Elderly residents fined for bird feeders because they attracted undesirable wildlife. Young families harassed over children's toys left in their yards. A branded visual pollution. One neighbor said Anna threatened to place a lien on their home over a garden gnome. Another had to repaint their house 3 times because Anna didn't approve the shade, even though it was listed as compliant in the guidelines. A retired teacher confessed Anna fined her for having too many books visible through her front window. Books. Her justification? Visual clutter. The abuse wasn't random. It was calculated at targeting the elderly, families with small children, and anyone too kind or too overwhelmed to fight back. And now, the whole Anna Drama-nest community was finally waking up. I finally understood why Walker had invested so much time and foresight into building his intricate trap. He knew exactly what kind of tyrant would eventually try to exploit his land, and Anna fit the profile perfectly. The Anna Drama-nest community called an emergency meeting within 48 hours. Anna tried to cling to control of the agenda, but the residents weren't having it. The moment she opened her mouth, they took over. For the first time in years, people realized Anna's power wasn't absolute. And more importantly, they weren't afraid anymore. The community center was packed wall to wall. Residents, once silenced by fear, were now fueled by outrage. Anna's attempts to maintain order were drowned out by a wave of questions about her illegal land grab and growing demands for accountability. Someone had printed and handed out my evidence packet across the room. People could see with their own eyes the photos of Anna's rule violations, the forged permits, and the paper trail of her family's involvement in the scheme. The confrontation was exactly what Walker had envisioned, a complete public dismantling of Anna's grip on the Anna Drama-nest community. Anna tried to open with a speech about upholding community standards, but the crowd cut her off with pointed questions about environmental law violations and her family's financial conflicts of interest. Clara stood and calmly presented a detailed timeline of Anna's abuse, methodical, backed with evidence, and damning. As she spoke, residents began rising one by one, sharing their personal stories of Anna's power-hungry tactics. Every voice added another stone to the mountain of evidence against her. 2 board members stood up and publicly distanced themselves from her. "We weren't aware of the conservation easement," one said, "or the family business connection. This changes everything." Anna's support collapsed in front of everyone. Then Mrs. Patterson, a frail, elderly, and long terrorized by Anna's fines and threats, stood up slowly. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I motioned to remove Anna Kent as Anna Drama-nest president for abuse of power and illegal actions against community members." Multiple people called out second. Almost in unison. It was a chorus, powerful, undeniable. The vote, 23-1. Only Anna voted in her own favor. She was stripped of all official power, her reputation shattered, and now facing possible criminal charges all in one night. I stood there, torn between the quiet man I used to be and the fighter I had become. But instead of going quietly, Anna unraveled. She looked feral, panicky, like a cornered predator. "You people don't understand what you're destroying," she shouted. "Charles Walker promised me access to that waterfront area. It's mine." Her outburst gave us the final piece of the puzzle. She just admitted Walker made her some kind of promise about my land, and that meant she had fallen right into the last trap he had carefully laid, years before. I wasn't just going to defeat her. I was going to make sure no one in the Anna Drama-nest community ever forgot what she'd done. As I sealed the last envelope for the authorities, and knock rattled my door, my heart skipped. I opened it, and there she was. Anna, eyes wild, voice low and threatening. "I hope you know what you're doing," she hissed, "because I will make sure you regret this." Then she turned and disappeared into the darkness. Later, as the crowd from the community meeting thinned, she found me again. Her eyes were glassy with rage and desperation. "You think you've won," she whispered, "but Walker's last laugh isn't what you think. There's something about your precious cabin you don't know." Her grin was unhinged, clinging to the idea that she still had a trump card. I didn't know if she was bluffing or if Walker had left one final surprise I hadn't uncovered yet, but the way she said it, with mad certainty, sent a chill through me. She radiated the desperation of someone who'd lost everything, but still believed she had one last weapon. Her final move came days later, an emergency community meeting. Her last stand. She showed up looking like a shadow of her former self, haggard, unpolished, running on nerves and caffeine. Gone was the composed authority figure. In her place stood someone broken by obsession. She clung to this fantasy that Walker had given her something, that she had a right to take my land. I walked into the room, heart pounding. The community center was filled again, but the mood was different now. Nobody was here to defend her. They had come to watch her fall for the last time. Charles Walker promised me that the waterfront would become community property after his death, she declared, her voice shaking. Oliver Reed is stealing from all of you. She was trying to stir the crowd one last time, but it didn't work. Everyone saw her for what she was, a desperate woman trying to rewrite the truth. The community had already seen the documents, the proof, the lies, and this time, no one was listening. Something about Anna's earlier whisper stayed with me, a sliver of uneasy, but I pushed it aside. The moment I'd prepared for was here. I needed to hold the room. Anna, I said, voice steady, I have one simple question for you. Did you ever wonder why Charles Walker placed such a strict conservation easement on my land? 8 years ago, every word, every document, every revelation had to land with precision. I laid the papers out on the table one by one, watching the ripples move through the Anadromnest community. Gasps, murmurs, stunned silence. Every reaction was another brick in the wall of truth I was building. Anna's expression shifted, at first confusion, then slow, creeping horror. The reality was beginning to dawn on her like morning light on a battlefield. That doesn't matter, she shouted, a hint of desperation leaking through. He promised me access to that waterfront for community development. That land was meant for us. But the panic in her eyes told a different story. She was starting to realize something terrible. Not only had her plan failed, she'd never even understood the game she was playing. Anna, I said calmly, you're right about one thing. Charles Walker did have a plan for community development, but you completely misunderstood what that plan was. The room went still. My land was never the target, it was the bait. Gasps echoed through the community center. Walker studied you for years. He knew your ambition, your greed would blind you to the obvious solution. While you spent months harassing me, filing bogus violations, breaking federal laws, and trying to steal protected land, the real development opportunity was sitting untouched. In plain sight. I unrolled a large map that Clara had prepared. The room leaned in. Community Lot 7B, I said, pointing. Direct road access, no conservation restrictions, fully permitted for development. 8 years ago, permits that your own brother's company bought. Anna staggered back, visibly shaken. The permits expired 3 days ago, I added. While you were obsessed with my conservation land chasing a fantasy, you ignored a legal, lucrative opportunity right under your nose. The look on Anna's face said it all. Complete devastation. Walker's plan had worked perfectly. He hadn't just protected his land, he'd orchestrated her downfall through her own arrogance. Walker gave this community 8 years to see who you really were, I said. And now, they know. A hush fell over the room as the weight of those words settled. Everyone had witnessed her collapse. Not from external sabotage but from walking straight into a trap she was too arrogant to see. Anna's face twisted with rage. But I didn't flinch. Not anymore. I had the truth. I had the evidence. And for the first time since this entire nightmare began, I had control. Anna looked around the room at the faces of those she'd bullied, manipulated, and deceived for years. Her voice cracked. I have to leave a broken bar, don't I? Mrs. Patterson, steady, kind, and fearless, nodded slowly. Yes, dear, you do. A new HOA board was voted in on the spot. They promised transparency, fairness, and respect for every resident. Anna's reign over the Anadromnest community was over, ended not by revenge, but by justice. That night, back at my cabin, I opened Walker's full letter for the first time. Oliver, if you're reading this, then Anna took the bait perfectly. Your cabin was never about the land. It was about finding someone honest enough to do the right thing when the moment came. You were that person. ACW. Anna was gone within 2 weeks. Her family's business folded, her influence vaporized, her name a cautionary tale whispered throughout the region. Under new leadership, the Anadromnest community began to thrive. Enforcement became fair, rules were applied equally, respect returned, and so did property values. 3 months later, I sat on my deck, the lake still and glowing in the sunset. Pecia, real Pecia, had finally returned, but just before that final scene played out, I'd caught one last look at Anna, As the crowd dispersed and chaos turned to closure, she turned to me with a ghost of her former fire. "You've only won the first round," she whispered. "The game's not over." Then she vanished into the shadows. I raised my beer to the sky, the wind rustling through the trees like a whisper from the past. Charles Walker Broken Bar. Wherever you area that was brilliant. You didn't just protect your land, you safeguarded an entire neighborhood from tyranny, a legacy few ever achieve. And sometimes, when the lake is perfectly still, I swear I can hear Walker's low chuckle in the breeze, a proof that his plan worked exactly as he intended. So what do you think? Was this the final chapter or just the end of Act 1? Drop a comment below. Let's hear your theory. And if this story gripped you, don't forget to show some love with a thanks.